So we'll get started with the session, and then in the meantime, I think people will be joining shortly. So I have an agenda today. So the first agenda point is I'll introduce about myself, what I'm going to speak today. So I'll give an introduction of myself, and then I'll be speaking about process explanation about the query management, what is query management and how query management works, or what is the importance of queries in clinical data management. I'll be speaking. Then I'll be taking some live Q&A about the query management. So this will be my agenda. So first point, I'll be introducing myself, and then we will be explaining about the process of clinical data management. Then we will be going for live Q&A, which I'll be taking questions from the group. After that, we will go for closeout. So first one, I think most of you guys know me. My name is Mujib. I am the founder and CEO for Clinosol Research, and I'm the basically trainer for clinical research, CDM, pharmacovigilance, and medical writing. So I'm a basically M.Pharm pharmacologist. I did my master's in clinical research with 15 years of industry experience. Then I started my entrepreneurship journey, which is around 5 years. So since 5 years, I'm running this organization, which is Clinosol Research. So Clinosol Research is mainly into providing the trainings for youngsters, freshers, and experienced people. So this is my introduction. Now coming back to what is query management in CDM. So now if you carefully see, the clinical data management process is being classified into three phases. The first phase is setup phase, wherein you design the database. You put a database and say that, okay, this is the protocol and this is how the data has to be collected on the case report forms. Then you will put some of the validation checks, either it is auto queries or manual queries. You will put that into your system. And then you will go for user acceptance testing. So this will all be done in setup phase. That's a phase to phase wherein you develop the CRFs, CCGs, and auto queries and manual queries and the testing. So that's your setup phase. So once the setup phase is done, once the database is ready, it goes for live. And once the study goes live, it means that it is available for the hospitals or sites. And most of the times, the clinical trials are being conducted as multi-centers. And all the multi-center trials, what we will do is we will give access to them so that they can enroll the patients. So they enroll the subjects into the clinical trials. So once they enroll the subjects into clinical trial, they start collecting the data into source document as well as into CRFs. The source document will be interpreted into case report form. And the case report form data, which is being collected from the subjects as per your protocol, has to be validated. Now, how do you validate? Who will validate? Who will make sure that the data integrity and quality of data is correct? Is something responsibility of data management. Then this place we will get one nice process. That process is called as query management. So the data which is being entered by investigator or CRC will be validated and will be corrected by your data manager in terms of raising the queries. So now data manager is responsible for handling query management or discrepancy management. So we use different words, but I'll not go into deeper what words and how it has to be used. It is being said as query management or discrepancy management or data management or validation, anything what you can use it. So one of the more important responsibility of data management or data manager is to validate the data, to make sure that the data is valued or the data is having quality, and also the data is having your verified data or source data verification is done. So this is what is called as data management or data validation. In this process, when the data is being entered by the investigator or site, the queries will be raised by data managers. If the data is invalid, either it is incomplete or either it is illogical or inconsistent or it is not as per the protocol or it is not as per the GCPs or regulations, then data manager raises the query. When the data is invalid, then the site will make sure that they answer or update the data to the data manager, the person who has raised the query. So based on the response and answer which is being given by your site to the data manager, data manager either he will close or he will one more time ask for more justification, which is closing of query or reissuing of query. So the whole bunch of work is called as query management or discrepancy management. And this is being used only for making the validity of data and making sure the data is having good integrity. So data integrity and quality of data is most important, because based on the clinical trial data only, we will get the approval for the drug. So how are we going to get approval? When we submit the clinical trial data to the regulatory body, they review the clinical trial data and they will approve the clinical trials based on the outcome of the data which is being submitted. And the clinical trial data which is being collected should be validated. It means that it should be complete, consistent, and logical. And it should be as per protocol and GCP and regulations and guidelines. So now this whole process is called as query management. Site enters the data manager raises the query, site answers the query, and then data manager either closes or reissue the query. So the whole work will be called as discrepancy management. So now this whole terminology is called as your query management or discrepancy management. There are two types of mainly queries. One is auto query and one is manual query. Auto query is system generated query. Manual query is raised by manually by data manager or CRA or statisticians. And now either it is auto query or manual query. First, once it is raised to the site, it is called as open query. Once it is been answered by the site, it is called as answered query. Once it has been reissued for more information, more clarification, then it is called as reissued query. Once it is closed by data manager without having any further questions or concerns about the data validity, then it is called as closed query. So the whole logic of this will be only one thing, that is query management. Raising of query and closing of query, reissuing of query, or answering of query. So all this terminologies comes into your only one thing. It is called as query management. So I hope I'm making some sense now with respect to your query management, that data manager is responsible for raising the queries. So with this, I think I'll take 1 minute of pause and I will open for questions wherein the students are open to ask questions. I can take questions from the chat box. You can ask questions. So they can ask you, what do you know about query management? So once they ask you a question about what do you know about query management, so query management is a process where you validate the data and make sure that the data is as per the regulations or GCP or your ethical considerations. So now this is what in terms of query management we call it. So now if someone asks you questions saying that what are the different types of query, you have to say that there is an open query which will be raised by data manager when data is incorrect, and there is an answered query when the site answers the query, then it is called as answered query with the proper answer. And when the query which is being answered by the site is not up to the mark, not up to the satisfaction of the data manager, then he will reissue the query. If it is fine, then he will close the query, and this process is called as closing of query. So 4 types of query: open query, answered query, reissued query, or closed query. So I'll take some questions now, that what are the different aspects of questions you wanted to ask, you can ask, and I'll be able to answer that. What are the possible questions in interview? See, what are the possible questions in interview they will ask is, what are the best practices to write a query text? How do you make sure that site understands the query text very nicely? So be sharp to the point wherein you're explaining what is a mistake, what is a error, what happened. Say for example, AE start date is missing. Now you clearly mention that on this form, on this AE, the AE start date is missing. Then I think that makes sure that the site understands the query. Or else, for example, if BMI value is out of border or BMI value is not within the limits of protocol, that clearly mention that as per protocol, the BMI value should be ABC or within the limits of ABC. However, the value which was being entered on the CRF of a BMI is not ABC. Can you just correct or clarify. So that's something which you have to make sure the query text should be written in a very nice way and giving a reference to a document. So, say for example, as per protocol, as per CCGs, as per this document. So this, as per this, you should have this. So, but this has been entered. So like that, you have to give reference. Target item should be clearly mentioned. So what mistake has happened should be clearly mentioned. And what corrections you are expecting should be clearly mentioned. So now based on it only, the whole query management workflow will work. So they will ask you, what are the best practices? Best practices, first one, do not use shortcuts or acronyms. Like for example, don't use WhatsApp languages when you are writing query text. And the second point, give references. Give references, whatever you have to provide nice references. The third point, clearly mention the target item and clearly explain what is a mistake, what has been mistake, and then what has to be corrected. And do not lead the site. Do not go and say that, okay, change this data item, we will make sure the other things. Don't go and tell that. So I think these are best practices, and they might ask questions about your what are your types of queries also. So they might ask what are the types of queries. They might ask sometimes what are the best practices of queries, and they might ask questions that who will raise manual queries, who will raise manual queries, who will raise auto queries, so who will answer the query, who will reissue the query. So this kind of questions are being asked in repeatedly in interviews. Now I'll park it here and I'll take questions, different questions anyone have. You can post it in chat box and I'll be able to explain all the questions regarding your query management. Today's topic is only query management, and that too particularly in data management. And this query management we do in electronic data capture. It's a EDC system. So I'll wait for people to ask some questions so that I can pick it up questions and answer your questions here. That what are the possible questions you can ask in interviews, you can ask me, and I will be able to explain that what is the process and how to answer these questions in interview. Any questions you guys have, please do post it here. Okay, so I have got one question. How do you prioritize and manage the queries in clinical trials? See, the most important thing is you get lot of queries, lot of data errors will be happening because it's a lack of training for the investigators or CRCs. You'll get bunches and bunches of queries. But which one to prioritize, which one to come first is most important point which we need to understand. So prioritization will be based on only one thing, that the data integrity and the safety of human subjects. So most important point is the safety of the subjects. So if the safety of the subject is being questionable, then that has to be prioritized. The safety of subjects, say for example, if there is an SAE and you have raised a query on SAE, then that has to be prioritized first because that's a subject safety. That's a subject safety. And the second priority should be given on the data which is being used for drawing the conclusions on the clinical trials. Say, for example, efficacy endpoints are there. That data is very important, that it can change the whole analysis purpose. That has to be prioritized. Now, the first priority will be given for the data which is used for safety of the subjects. The second priority will be given for the data which is used for conclusion of the study results. The study result can be modified or changed. Like this, you have to prioritize. And last priority will be any item which is just used as supporting data items and missing data. Say, for example, the data is missing. In that case, the last priority will be given, but all the queries have to be given priority based on subject safety and the data which is used for the conclusion of the clinical trial results. So I think I have answered that question. Priority is more important when you are taking the queries, because as a data manager, it's your work to prioritize which one to action first. So because there are two errors. Now, which error you will raise the query first? So it will be based on patient safety and also the data which is being used for study conclusions that are prioritized than the less critical ones. And mainly you have to understand that once you raise a query, you have to know about tracking and categorizing and resolving of queries, prevention of delays for the study timeline. Because if you just raise the query, site does not answer, you don't close, and at the end, study timelines gets impacted. So that situations you need to make sure that you should not allow the delay in the study timeline. So the queries should be prioritized accordingly based on your subject safety and also the study conclusion data. So that's, I think that's a very nice question which is been asked. Okay, now what is a query in context of clinical data management? See, queries are to raise questions, concerns when we think that the data is not as per logical, consistent, incomplete, or the data is not as per protocol, or the data is not as per GCP or regulation. Now, queries will be raised by the data manager to ensure the data integrity and validity of data is being maintained. So that's what you call it as the query in terms of data management. So queries are being raised for only one reason, for particularly data integrity and quality of data. So that's what we call it as query in context of clinical data management. So query can be a auto or can be a manual. Auto is system generated, manual is manually raised by your data manager. So I think that's something which is called as what is query in context with clinical data management. So this is what you have to answer is. Okay, now I think who creates auto queries, who creates manual query, who answers all these queries. See, auto queries and manual queries. Auto queries are raised by the system, which is programmed by your programmers or IT professionals, and manual queries are raised by manually data managers or CRA or clinical data management teams or statisticians. And all the queries have to be answered by site, because site is the person who enters the data into clinical data management system. Okay, so now the next question I have, how do we ensure that queries are resolved in compliance with regulatory standards? See, remember, if you want to go into CDM, or if you want to go into clinical trials, or if you want to work in SaaS, or if you want to work in any of the clinical research aspects, then you should be working as per the regulatory standards. And the regulatory standards are either it is GCP, or either it is GCDMP, or either it is 21 CFR Part 11, or it is as per HIPAA. All queries and their resolution should be documented. As per Audit Trial 21 CFR Part 11, every query which is being raised by data manager has to be tracked, which is being answered by site has to be tracked, which is being closed by data manager and reissued by data manager also has to be tracked. Everything should be covered as per documented and tracked and validated as per Audit Trial. So that's what 21 CFR Part 11. And this all process should be documented in one of the most important document, that is what you call it as data management plan. Regular audits has to be conducted and quality control checks has to be conducted to verify whether the queries which are being raised, whether the queries which are being closed, whether queries which are being reissued are being in adherence or in compliance or as per your regulatory requirement, which is GCP or GCDMP or your 21 CFR Part 11 or as per your HIPAA guidelines. So remember, data manager should follow only one thing, that is GCP and GCDMP and 21 CFR Part 11 when they are raising the query or closing the query or reissuing query. And regular audits and quality control inspections has to be conducted, or quality control checks has to be conducted to verify that we are complying, we are adhering to the regulatory requirement when we are raising the queries or closing the queries or reissuing the queries. I think that's a very nice question to ask, that how do we ensure that we are making sure that we are complying with the regulations when we are raising the queries. Okay, I think I have answered that question even. I have one more question, I think. how do we communicate clinical sites to address the query efficiently? See, already have identified that the only way to communicate with the site is the queries. So, and queries, if it is being mistakenly written or if it is being given in a wrong manner, then I think there is a lot of noise from the site saying that we are not understanding what queries you are asking. So they will just say that I don't know how to close this query, I don't know how to answer this query. So now one of the most important point we have to understand is effective communication is key. The writing the query text with a lot of best practices, that what mistake has happened, what is the references you have to verify, and how you have to correct, and what expectation is there about that query has to be clearly mentioned. And that means that effective communication is key. Query should be clear, query should be concise, query should be accompanied with almost all relevant documents, including protocol or CCGs or any of the requirements. So you have to be clear, concise, and crisp in manner, and with references when you are writing a query. And also establishing the relationship with the CRA and also with your site, either through mails or through calls with the CRA. You go and explain saying that, okay, site, we are raising the queries and site is not understanding what we are trying to ask in the query management. The data is still invalid. Can you correct this? Because this happens that the timeline is coming to the end and we are raising lastly the more and more queries. So there are situations where the team works for 24/7 to close the queries when the queries are being getting answered. So now make sure that you are raising the query with a clear, concise, and accompanied by relevant documentation. And also communication is key. And also provide training to the site to make sure that site understands how to answer the query and how to enter the data, particularly into EDC system. So electronic data capture system, they have to enter and they have to make sure that the data which is being entered is valid and having the high amount of quality standards. So I think that's the core part we should understand, that the queries which are being raised is being clearly understood by your site, and they are able to reciprocate with the proper response and justification and updating of data for that particular query. That's something which is called as the whole process of query management. Okay, I think I'm waiting for more questions to come in. So I have answered almost every question. Please do ask questions. I'll answer some more questions. And one more thing, nowadays every query management has to be done by EDC system, which is electronic data capture, which is one more time. The site enters electronically, data manager reviews the data electronically, they looks into output of data, analytically they understand the data, and they predict that what is going to happen on that particular data items, on that particular aspects in clinical data management. So that's something, prediction is more important, data analytics is more important, and how efficiently the data can be validated. How if we see the data manager whole activity is to validate the data, how efficiently he can validate the data is something which we have to understand. Okay, so one more time, I think we have got one more question. Can you explain about the whole process of discrepancy management in a nutshell? Simple logic, data is being entered by site, and once the data is not as per regulation and protocol or guidelines, then queries will be raised by the data manager, and the queries will be answered by site, and data manager either closes or reissues the query. So the entire discrepancy management is this one in a nutshell about working in queries. I think I have answered your questions, guys. Perfect. So I'm waiting for more questions so that I can answer more questions. I'll give one more minute of time. Okay, I have answered almost all questions. Who creates auto queries? See, generally auto queries are system generated queries which are easily manageable, like missing data, or say for example, male subject is there and pregnancy result is given as positive, or for example, date of death is entered, a death date is after your adverse event date, something like that. Easy queries we can do it in auto queries, but rest of difficult queries has to be done in manual queries. And one more thing, the strategies we always, the strategies whenever we work on query management is very clear, that as much as possible built up validation checks. Auto queries should be more than manual queries, and all the queries has to be tracked accordingly, and all the queries has to be documented accordingly. All the queries has to be tracked, documented, and properly audit tracked. Then only it is called as query management. And some of the example for auto queries, say for example, there is a ICF date and there is a AE start date. Now AE start date always should be after your ICF date. If AE start date is before ICF date, then the auto query should be fired, wherein we call it as the AE start date is before the ICF date, correct or clarified. So something like that, it's called as auto query. And when it comes as manual query, so manual query is the one when there are two forms which are repeating forms and there is a duplicate records of these two forms. Now, say for example, fever is being given in AE form and medical history, and there is a overlapping of date. That this complex checks cannot be assessed. Or else, say for example, in adverse event, we are saying the treatment has been given. When you are saying treatment has been given, there should be a treatment record. And if treatment record is missing for the adverse event, then I think we need to have this as manual query. Okay, so I think we have got one more question. Strategies do you employ to minimize the queries during the data collection? So strategies, what are the different strategies we involve, or what are the aspects we involve when we are doing query management? So the strategy is simple, that as much as possible give training to the site. So first one, provide nice training to the site, wherein they can understand that what data should be entered. And the second point is, it should be given very clear knowledge to the site about the use of electronic data capture with CCGs, CRF completion guidelines, and also built-in validation checks. Built-in validation checks should be given very clearly about the auto queries, which is more important for us to understand about reducing the errors and reducing the needs for the queries. And regularly data monitoring visits will reduce the queries, data monitoring visits, and also source data verification. So source data verifications also will reduce the queries, and it increases or it contributes to the data quality. So you need to have more of training, robust EDC system, more of auto queries, and more of monitoring visits, and also source data verification. Then this will minimize the number of queries during the data collection system. If site understands how to enter the data, the number of queries will get reduced. If there are more monitoring visits conducted, more of source data verification conducted, I think data entry errors will reduce. Why we are requiring queries? Because there are data entry errors in the system. That's why we want the queries to come. So if you don't have data entry errors, if the data is being entered correctly, if the source data is being transcribed correctly, if the database is up to the mark, if it is having quality and integrity of the data, then there is no question of getting the queries in the system, raising of queries in the system. So I think that's the core part, that to reduce the number of queries or the pressure of queries on the system, you need to have very robust system. And future is, you will get nice databases where the data can be integrated with all systems. So now CDM is at the middle, site is here, and PV is here, SAS is here, medical writing is here. Why are we having 4-5 teams differently? Why can't we integrate every system under one roof? This is what we are going to think about the advancement in terms of clinical trials. So now I think we are getting some systems which will get in with you, that the data will be entered directly at the site and validated and cleaned nicely with the help of data managers, and then it is statisticians who run the analysis there only, the system only, and PV team will check the activities there only, and then we continue to evolve, or we continue to clean the data, particularly with respect to your activities. So now I think that's how the strategies has to be involved in minimizing the number of queries. Okay, I think I spoke about so much about query management. Endpoint. What is query management? Query management is the process of validating and making sure that the data is, the clinical trial data is as per the quality and data integrity by raising of auto queries or manual queries, and reissuing of queries or closing of queries, and site who answers the queries. And the best practices of query management we have discussed, strategies to reduce the queries we have discussed, and the whole compliance of the regulatory requirement we have discussed, and how query management has to be conducted. So I think with this, if no more questions are there, we will take some feedbacks from the students who have joined. And I wanted to know what topic do you wanted to have live sessions like this, so that I can plan accordingly and I can give some more sessions on this kind of topics. So I'm open for any more questions before I close this live, or any feedbacks anyone wants to give, or any topics you wanted to have live, which I'll be taking point, wherein every Saturday we will have one live session for your interview based questions on a particular topic, any topic like informed consent form, or causality assessment, or ICSR case processing or protocol, or case report form, or regulatory requirement documents, something like that. You let me know the topics to be taken covered for this kind of live sessions. And also any feedbacks you wanted to give, please give your feedbacks, so that constructively we can update our live sessions, and live sessions probably will be helpful. So any more questions anyone have before I leave you? And so that, okay, I think I'm good with this, and thank you for joining today live. And I hope this live session of query management was helpful with you. Let's meet one more session next week. Thank you so much.